Okay, so the point of going back over this slide here, we're just picking up kind of where we left off from class, is that I want to reiterate the point that there are cognitive factors involved with where we direct our attention. Um, of course, our attention can be influenced by our goals, which is why I wanted you guys last class to do a couple of tasks for this particular picture. So here we have this painting, and I asked you guys first to estimate the ages of the people. So when you're looking at this picture, the first thing you're going to look at is their face. So you're going to be looking here. This is where you're going to look, and your eye tracking will actually move based off of what you're looking at here. You are interested in what is going on with their faces, and this person looks like they might be in their 40s or 50s. This person looks very young. This is a child. This is also a child. And you're going to be motivated by the goal of their faces. So you're going to be looking here. You're going to be looking from face to face to face. And this is exactly what we see in this case right here. You actually see that we are looking at different faces from face to face to face because we're motivated by determining how old these people are. When we look at, for example, just moving this back, when we're looking at the clothes, we are going to be, looking at what's going on here. We're going to be looking at here. We're going to be looking at, is this person wearing a dress? This person's got buttons. And so we're going to be looking up and down, up and down to look at their actual clothes. And this is what we see here. We actually see, looking at the different structures here, of what makes up their clothes. This person's wearing a coat versus this person's wearing a dress, etc. Now, when we look at, for example, we look at the objects and the people in the room, we're going to be looking at everything, right? So we're looking at the pictures, we're looking at the people, we're looking at the chairs, we're going to be looking all over the room. And, our direction of gaze is going to be influenced by all of the things and objects in the room. And so we know that, of course, our attention is going to be directed based off of the goal that we have in mind. So if the goal is to look at the faces because to determine ages, if the goal is to look at clothes, you're going to look at the whole body. If the goal is to look at the position of everything in the room, you're going to be looking everywhere. So another thing, though, is that we find, so not only are these cognitive factors in place, but also what do you know in terms of what is going on with the task, and what do you know about the task? And so we find that if the task of the picture that you're looking at or the video that you're looking at requires some sort of action on your part, there's going to be a need of sequence of events. So for example, we're making a peanut butter sandwich. We have a glass of water, we have a knife, we have some bread, peanut butter, a plate, and jelly. Well, you have this bread that's here, okay, and maybe a piece of bread here, and then you have a knife. Well, are you going to, are you going to take the knife and do something with the bread first? Or are you going to take the knife and you're going to scoop the peanut butter first? And so the sequence of events is going to determine what you look at first. And so here, the bread was looked at first, and then the person looked at the plate. And then the person looked at the peanut butter and all of these things, and then you're looking based off of what you would do. First, you would get the bread out. Then you would unscrew the lid. Then you would, take the knife and then put it in the peanut butter and then put it on the bread. All of these things are task-related knowledge because, of course, it's a sequence of events. You know how to do this. You know the proper technique of making a peanut butter sandwich. And so that's something that you're very familiar with. So of course it changes where we look and how we look and the order in which we look when it's something that we're familiar with. We also know that our attention can be influenced by the things around it. We view attention as like a spotlight. And we know that if we're looking at something in particular, we know that the area in which we're looking is going to be impacted by what we give our attention to. So if we're paying attention to one specific thing, the location of that area is we're going to be more attentive to. And we know that we're going to be faster at being able to identify items that are in that particular area. We know that attention can influence appearance and change what we see or what we perceive to see. And we also know that attention can change our physiological response in that we actually see different brain activity based off of what we're looking at. And we also see that not only is it based off the object, but we also see based off of location, there's actually different activity in the brain regions. And I'm going to go through an example of each of these to kind of to go through the spatial part of attention. So spatial attention is where we're looking at in terms of location. Posner did this experiment where a person was looking at a fixation point. Let's see if I have a picture of it here. So they're looking at this fixation point. There's an arrow that is what we refer to as a pre-cue, meaning that it's going to cue the person to that there's a stimulus that will very likely appear on the right or left side. And then sometimes it was consistent, which is a valid trial, meaning that sometimes the pre-cue said it was going to show up on the right side and it showed up on the right side. And then sometimes it was inconsistent or invalid, that it would show, oh, this is going to show you a square on the left side, but in fact it showed on the right side. And the idea is that whenever you see the square show up, or the stimulus, that you're supposed to push the button when you see it. Now, what Posner found in this experiment was that, of course, people responded fastest on those valid or consistent trials. When a person was given a pre-cue that the stimulus is going to be on the right side, they were much faster at pressing the button when they actually saw it on the right side. And so Posner said, well, this is demonstrating that when you direct attention, we're even faster at identifying things. So this would be an example here of a valid trial. This says that the stimulus is going to show up on the right side, and in this case, this is what happened. And people were very fast at this. So this is where we see this right here. So the reaction time was much faster. They did this much more quickly, as you can see by the less than 250 milliseconds it took them to identify that they saw a stimulus. On any invalid trial, you would expect that the stimulus is here, but this is an inconsistent trial and it showed up on this side. People took a lot longer, over 300 milliseconds, to identify that they saw a stimulus. And so another so we know that, okay, attention speeds responding to a particular location. And so another idea here is that attention must be a spotlight, okay? So when we pay attention to something, we actually pay attention to the entire object. And when we pay attention to one specific part of the object, it's like shining a spotlight on that thing. And so this would be sort of, we're going to go into a couple of examples where we're looking at the actual object, and that if we're attending to an object, we're actually much faster at being able to identify things on the object because we've got a spotlight on that object, meaning our attention. So there's this example of an experiment where Eagly showed two rectangles, and then there was a cue. So these are the two rectangles here. So this would be an example of one trial. And the cue would show, for example, on A, okay? And then the task is to press the button when you see the target. And what they found was that people were faster at identifying the targeted positions. And if it was within the object, in this case here, okay, B, if B was within this rectangular object, people were actually faster than if they saw it on an opposing object. Okay, the distance from here to here and here to here, this is actually closer than this to this. So we know that the spotlight is of attention is on this object. When a person is cued for this area, they're very fast at identifying that there's a letter there. But if the cue is here and it actually shows up here, we're actually much faster than if it shows up here. So we know that just by directing attention to a particular object, we can speed up responding to that particular object. We also know that when we direct our attention, that it can influence our perception of the appearance of the object or thing that we're looking at. So Carrasco did a few experiments looking specifically at gratings. And so the idea was that you're going to see, you're going to look at a fixation dot here, okay? And then it's supposed to cue you here of which grating to look at. So here, the person had to identify the contrast between the two gratings, okay? They had to determine which one, this one or this one, had a more pronounced grating, a darker contrast. And so they had to fixate on the center and then determine the orientation of the bars with the higher contrast. So instead of saying, oh, the left one was darker, the right one was darker, they had to say, the orientations. They actually had to say out the orientations. And then right before the gratings appeared, of course, there was a cue flashing, and they had to determine if they were able to, are they able to actually observe the actual appearance of the gratings when a cue was flashed. And so when there was a really, really big difference between the gratings from here and here, one much darker than the other, what they found is this did nothing. This did not influence that at all. Now, when the contrast was the same, okay, for example, these two gratings are the same. When a cue flashed over here, the person would be misled and say that this grating was more pronounced and not be able to actually notice that they are indeed the same. So this change in appearance of the grating only occurred when the cue flash was given, only if the gratings were the same. If there was a more pronounced difference in the gratings, the person was not distracted by the cue and they did it correctly. So this demonstrated that we can actually be influenced in terms of appearance by where we're directing our attention. So because that cue flashed here, our attention, even though we're looking right here, our attention is more focused over here. And so we're going to see this as much more pronounced grating. Another experiment to look at, so we notice, okay, it's going to change appearance. Does it change our physiological responding? Do we actually see a difference in the brain? And it turns out, yes, it does. So where we direct our attention, how we direct our attention is actually we can actually see that change in the brain. And so O'Craven did this experiment. We talked about something similar before, where there was a face in a house, as you can see in the stimulus here. But we had talked about binocular rivalry before. In this case, we're talking about both eyes being exposed to this picture. And O'Craven wanted to see what would happen if they told the subjects to attend to either the house or the face. And actually, like I'm telling you now, I want you to look at the face. I want you to look at the house. And in this particular experiment, one of the items was moving. For example, in this case, the house might be stationary and the face might be moving slightly back and forth, or the face might be stationary and the house might be moving back and forth. And the object was, you're supposed to pick one and attend to that. And so you're actually choosing which one you want to attend to, either the moving item or the still item. And notice this is not binocular rivalry because both images are being shown simultaneously to both eyes. And what was found with this is when, for example, the person is looking at the face and ignoring the house, they're directing their attention at the face, they're looking at the fixation point, but they're thinking and looking at the face. You found that the signal change actually changed for the face area, and the house area you didn't see a whole lot of fusiform face area. There was a much decreased activity for the house. When the person looked at the house, okay, we see much greater PPA, place area, compared to the face area. And so we actually see a difference in physiological response compared to what the person was focused on. In fact, they were actually able to, with 100% accuracy, predict what the person was focused on, either the face or the house, just by looking at the activation of either the FFA or the PPA. So I could tell with 100% accuracy, predict what they were looking at. Because there was movement, so here it says that there was a moving face, we actually saw movement activation in a movement area, but we're not going to go into that into this particular lecture. We'll talk a little bit about movement stuff a little bit later. Now, so when we look at another experiment about looking at what we see in the brain, the activation that we see in the brain, we can actually map out, based on different gradings, what areas of the brain we're attending to. We can actually see, for example, here, if the person's looking directly at the middle part, okay, and we can see physiologically if the person is attending to this area or this area or this area. We can actually see that based off of the activation pattern. So here, for example, this bright yellow and red, would correspond maybe to this. This right here, this bright activation may correspond to this. And we can actually see where the person is directing their attention just based on the activation that we see in that particular area. And again, we can actually predict where the person is focusing their attention. They're physically looking here, but they're focusing their attention, for example, here on B. We can actually see that in the activation patterns in the brain. And so we know that where you direct your attention is, of course, changing physiologically where that's happening in the brain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the lecture because I don't want to do a really, really long lecture. So I'm going to end the lecture here. And then I'm going to revisit this slide for the next lecture because I want to do a few lectures that are kind of smaller, so it doesn't so you're not sitting for an hour and a half staring at your screen. So I'm going to pick back up on this slide for the next lecture, and so just continue on to the next part to get the rest of this information.